You wield the term strategic autonomy like a talisman, rubbing its edges at the break of dawn, convinced it will steady your trembling hands today. Before the mirror, you rehearse confidence, yet your gaze drifts to the vacant hooks where once hung the weighty reassurances of old. Each agreement you ink now feels like a mere shell of a winter coat, tailored for a climate not your own, and still, you shiver ceaselessly. You convince yourself that independence is a door within your grasp, yet each nail you procure is priced by the patience and temperament of others. In the stillness of night, the sound of ships echoes like distant footsteps, and your mind counts down supplies. One jar, one bolt, one grain at a time. You entertain partners at your table, a smile too bright, masking the tremble of your glass, praying they overlook how cautiously you measure out trust. Your adversaries wield not firearms, but invoices, delays, and letters drenched in politeness, each one binding tighter around your chest like a velvet noose. You begin accumulating symbols, flags, speeches, ceremonies, realizing that these tokens bear less weight compared to the void left by absent parts and hushed factories. During discussions, you advocate for resilience, yet your tongue carries the metallic taste of iron as though you've been biting coins to assess their worth all morning. The marketplaces beyond your window churn like a stormy sea, and you keep erecting higher barriers, oblivious to the fact that water makes no bargains with stone. You borrow time as a gambler does luck, stacking promises like chips, hoping the game doesn't turn before you manage to rise from your seat. Your allies nod in agreement, then timidly avert their gaze, for attention is a currency too, and you can sense yours leaking through unseen fissures. You demand new supply chains, new pathways, new foundations, yet the terrain is already claimed, fenced off, and parched for an alternative harvest. Each temporary measure evolves into permanent furniture, and soon navigating your own room becomes a journey of bruised shins against hidden compromises. You find yourself maintaining two ledgers, one for public scrutiny, polished and pristine, and another for the shadows where the real expenses seep through the pages. The more you assert your freedom, the more your voice rings hollow, rehearsed like a captive reciting a statement, a smile grinning just off camera. Your industries hum with activity, yet the melody feels borrowed, and you dread the moment the musician falls silent, leaving your own silence exposed and undeniable. You grasp for control with gloved fingers, yet everything slips through contracts, confidence, credit, smooth as fish, leaving only the oppressive scent of panic. When bills arrive, they do not announce their presence. Instead, they enter unbidden, seating themselves with an air of familiarity, as if they know precisely where you stash your spare key. You come to understand that autonomy was never a protective shield but a harsh reflection, revealing the stark truth. Your strength is built on the foundation of debt, and debt is ever mindful. You redraw your boundaries with committees and slogans, but the authentic border resides in the credit line, invisible ink that stings when it's touched. The initial cut appears minor, a postponed shipment, a missing component, and you dismiss it with a laugh, like a harmless cough you refuse to acknowledge. But that cough returns at night, louder and more profound, prompting you to sleep in your clothes, ever ready to flee from dreams that elude your grasp. You hold urgent calls where everyone speaks in hushed tones, as if raising a voice might shatter the ceiling and invite the entire sky to collapse upon you. Your warehouses may appear full, yet every box is a ruse, for the one thing you truly require remains perpetually absent. You dangle incentives like sweets before frightened children, but the hands you're nourishing remain loyal to another caregiver's embrace. Each time you proclaim diversification, you merely exchange one leash for another, opting for softer leather while feigning ignorance of the collar still secured around your neck. You stand behind a podium, the lights uncomfortably warm against your skin, acutely aware of the room, gauging your worth as a butcher, evaluates meat calmly and precisely. Your currency morphs into a mood ring, shifting hues with every rumor, teaching you to decipher fear through the subtlest headlines and fleeting glances. You urge your people to persevere, to take pride, to remain steadfast, but you hear their cupboards responding with hollow cheers, echoing the emptiness within. Within the confines of your own thoughts, you find yourself accepting conditions you would once have deemed degrading, for humiliation is a lesser burden than the void, if only for another month. The agreements arrive cloaked in congeniality, and you affix your signature, feeling it like the slow, quiet rupture of a vein, an act that cannot be undone. You aspire to construct your own industries, yet the machines demand foreign labor, hands tied to calendars that do not acknowledge your existence. The more fervently you pursue self-sufficiency, the more your debt clings to you like a shadow under the midday sun, short, dark, and inescapable. You begin to allocate truth in measured portions, slicing it thinly, feeding disparate bits to various rooms, praying no one contemplates the differing plates. Your advisors murmur the word stability, yet their glances dart toward exits, revealing a deeper belief in escape than in your potential. The markets probe you like a predator against a barrier, nudging, hesitating, then pressing further, anticipating the first creak of weakness. You sense your autonomy morphing into a mere act, realizing every act requires patrons, and patrons invariably seek their names illuminated above the stage. As dawn breaks, you gaze at the horizon and confront the bitter truth. You cannot purchase freedom with borrowed currency without sacrificing fragments of your essence. Yet, you maintain your smile, for it is the final asset within your grasp, although it too begins to feel appropriated by someone other than yourself. You start to gauge days by grace periods instead of sunrises, as time itself now bends to the whims of lenders with soft voices and sharp recollections. Each reform feels hasty, like stitching a wound in a frantic race, knowing that the thread may barely hold long enough to conceal the bleeding. You unveil ambitious plans, but your hands instinctively reach back, seeking reassurance that the old foundations still stand, still willing to support you. The media celebrates your determination, yet applause is fleeting, and silence invariably accrues interest when it settles heavily in a room. Your people labor with greater intensity and duration, mistaking resilience for progress, while exhaustion's melody becomes the anthem of the nation. You assure them that sacrifice is transitory, even as the notion of temporary morphs from brevity into an endless ordeal. The supply chains you once relied upon disintegrate like brittle threads, each tug revealing how little warmth you truly possessed. You cast blame on nature, luck, or fate, evading the quiet mathematics that trails you from conference to conference, seat to seat. At night, spreadsheets invade your mind like specters, dreams of ledgers with watchful eyes, observing, waiting, never blinking. You begin trading favors rather than futures. Favors retain a semblance of humanity, even if their costs surpass mere numbers. Your speeches on independence grow increasingly concise, pared down by advisors who fear market volatility more than they dread your disappointment. You feel your leverage waning, stretched like aged fabric, poised to rupture at the slightest honest tug. New dependencies masquerade as partnerships, grinning widely, shaking hands with vigor, tallying their costs in silence. You become acutely aware of how often you utter "for now," as if relentless repetition could convert delay into strategy and hope into tangible reality. The room fills with graphs you scarcely acknowledge, for you already grasp the narrative they are too afraid to articulate aloud. You sense a shift when calls go unanswered, replies arrive tardily, and urgency fails to elicit reciprocity. You come to understand that power does not dissipate in dramatic bursts. Rather, it thins, evaporates, leaving behind only outlines where substance once thrived. You persist in asserting that this is a period of transition, not decline. Yet true transitions typically lead somewhere, and here you remain, locked in place. The price of autonomy unfolds gradually, like frost spreading across glass, charming initially, but eventually impossible to disregard. You come to accept that the collapse is not on the horizon. It resides within you, patient, financed, and awaiting the moment the lights fade. Each morning, you awaken rehearsing the delicate art of control, much like an actor reciting lines, conscious that the script morphs at the slightest disruption, a cough, a throat clearing. The urgency of life becomes your new normal, the wailing of sirens replaced by relentless calendar alerts and whispered deadlines that stretch infinitely beyond reach. You observe how rapidly patience dissipates when returns falter, how loyalty diminishes when profits refuse to smile. Your savings become a faint memory, a tale you share with younger colleagues about the winters when cupboards brimmed with provisions, free from anxiety. You find yourself negotiating endlessly, even in silence, measuring the weight of pauses, counting breaths, sensing power in the subtlest of hesitations. The agreements you forge feel transient, like bridges woven from fragile rope, swaying delicately under the burden of promises that rush across at once. You come to understand that strength is merely leased, not owned, and the rent perpetually increases when the occupant begins to settle in. Each reform births a new reliance, a quiet echo that resonates later when doors refuse to open without formal consent. Your planners sketch futures in pencil, aware that ink conveys deception when erasers are already gripped tightly in every hand. You speak of sovereignty, yet the term feels fragile, as delicate as glass, shattering at the slightest tap. The pressure no longer presents itself through threats. Instead, it assumes the guise of concern advice, friendly warnings swathed in silk. You express gratitude publicly, for to decline kindness now appears reckless, even if that kindness demands a heavy toll. Inside, you sense a hollowness growing, as though you are a tree defying the storm, merely standing because your bark still maintains an appearance of strength. Your policies multiply, layers upon layers, until even you lose track of which were designed to protect and which were meant to appease. You observe others moving more swiftly, freely, and you question when caution quietly supplanted ambition in your very veins. The future you envisioned continually recedes, like a coastline you pursue while sinking deeper into the soft, deceptive sand. You begin to conflate survival with success, celebrating stability as castaways do a new day afloat in deep waters. Autonomy becomes a mantra, whispered nightly in the hope that repetition might fill the void left by vanished belief. When you finally relent to stillness, the weight of exhaustion envelops you, revealing how long you have been burdened by weight that was never truly yours to carry. In that quiet moment, the realization strikes. The power shift didn't occur abruptly. It unfolded gradually while you were preoccupied with managing decline. You begin to notice how often decisions are labeled as necessary, a term that subtly erases choice while feigning to offer it in abundance. What once felt like strategy has devolved into mere reaction, like flinching before an incoming blow, hoping that anticipation equates to control. Your calendar fills with reviews rather than visions, audits instead of aspirations, as if glancing backward might somehow stall the inevitable descent. You remind yourself this is prudence, not fear, even as your body knows the distinction better than your consciousness. The room swells with consultants, each one promising to shed light, each billing for the confidence that seems now to elude you entirely. You embrace their jargon, for it brings a measure of solace, even when it elucidates nothing and resolves even less. Gradually, your policies cease to mold reality and start to apologize to it, shifting course after every encounter. You perceive respect transitioning into mere tolerance, then into patience, the kind reserved for chronic problems that refuse solutions. Your leverage diminishes not during crises, but within the routine, diluted by an incessant need for accommodation. You catch yourself celebrating avoidance, lauding the outcomes where nothing broke, nothing shifted, nothing improved. The concept of control contracts until it is reduced to mere survival, which increasingly demands recognition for its relentless endurance. Laughter drifts from distant places, lighter and quicker, unencumbered by the cautious steps you now misinterpret as wisdom. Your sense of autonomy starts to mirror a curio preserved, admired, yet devoid of life. You guard your stability like a treasured artifact, fear gripping you that a too forceful touch will reveal its delicate nature. Each promise you utter necessitates a footnote, every plan an exemption clause, every envisioned future a cautionary note. You come to see that dependency does not make a grand entrance. It establishes itself so seamlessly that any resistance feels futile. The transformation persists subtly, recognized in habits rather than headlines, in nuances rather than proclamations. You linger in anticipation of an opportunity to reclaim your agency, oblivious to the fact that such moments are luxuries rarely afforded by debt. What you deem balance is, in truth, mere suspension, teetering between forces beyond your control. And in this suspension, power shifts away from you without requiring your consent or acknowledgement. You find yourself speaking in qualifiers, careful phrases cushioning each assertion, as though truth has become too costly to articulate directly. Meetings stretch interminably, not due to deepening issues, but because no one dares to be the first to concede that the space is constricting. You perceive how approval now carries conditions, gentle affirmations tethered to expectations you never agreed to. What once resembled collaboration feels choreographed now, each movement rehearsed to skirt around hidden conflicts. Your confidence dissipates quietly, grain by grain, until you can no longer recall when certainty last felt instinctive. You shift the weight of responsibility upward and outward, mistaking diffusion for safety, failing to remember that blame travels faster than solace. Each reassurance exacts a toll, and you begin to pay with future flexibility, bartering tomorrow's peace for today's calm. The term market reaction supplants instinct, teaching you to listen outwardly before turning your ear inward. You observe how the silence following announcements stretches, growing weightier, akin to a breath held in anticipation, never released. Control dwindles to timing, opting not for action, but for the moment to concede that you cannot halt it. You defer decisions, hoping that delay will mitigate repercussions, unaware that delay itself has become a choice with its own demands. In your midst, competitors adapt more swiftly, effortlessly, unburdened by the obligations you persist in calling responsibilities. Your autonomy lingers mostly in your words, articulated painstakingly, preserved like an heirloom no one dares to employ. You strive to uphold appearances with growing intensity, polishing exteriors while the foundations shift quietly beneath. The price of compliance merges into customary costs, until obedience feels less like a mandate and more like procedure. You forego questions about your desires, concentrating instead on what you can concede without sparking discomfort in others. Power now engages with you obliquely, conveyed through reactions, signals, pauses, all while never needing to announce its presence. You notice the room tilt ever so slightly, not enough to topple, but just enough that remaining still demands constant recalibration. Wariness becomes a policy, for tired systems resist less and question even further. By the time you grasp how much has shifted, it dawns on you that control did not merely slip away, it was methodically relinquished. You begin to hear your own words reverberate back at you, altered just enough to dull their impact, smoothed out by spaces you were never a part of. Choices that once felt secure at home now demand outside validation, a fleeting glance towards others before you dare step ahead. Your plans seem to align less with your desires and more with the reactions you anticipate, though you realize you can never fully forecast them. Confidence becomes precarious, freely given only when circumstances favor you, cruelly pulled away at the slightest shift in mood. You learn to choose your words with caution, not to inspire, but to sidestep the silence that follows the sting of disappointment. The price of errors escalates, not in punitive measures, but in access that grows quietly limited in their aftermath. You sense the room's gaze upon you as you adapt, where compliance earns you tranquility, while resistance invites a frigid distance. Autonomy now manifests merely as a tone, a posture, a whisper of possibility rather than a palpable truth. Your aspirations shrink in scope, becoming smaller, more cautious, crafted to soothe rather than to ignite change. You cease pondering what might be constructed, diverting your focus instead on what remains intact with the lightest touch. Around you, authority shifts its arrangement, neglecting to exclude you but subtly placing you farther from the table's very heart. You accept your new position, knowing that dissent would read as theatrics, and such displays are costly when your credit is waning. The language of inevitability seeps in, predicting outcomes with unsettling accuracy, softening any blame before it materializes. You recognize the pattern too late. Every concession disguised as temporary, every surrender pretending to be practical. Stability emerges as the supreme virtue, even when it serves to reinforce another's advantage. You find yourself defending arrangements you once critiqued, fearing that change might disrupt the fragile balance you've managed to maintain. Your voice lowers not from peace but from caution, molded by spaces that hold memories of dissent. Power no longer debates with you. It lingers in the background, fully aware that time is its most devoted ally. You feel diminished without overt aggression, shrunk without confrontation, transformed by subtle shifts rather than any single decisive strike. And within that quiet transformation, you grasp how the shift occurred while everyone dubbed it cooperation. You look back, searching for the moment it slipped away, the meeting, the agreement, the compromise that blurred boundaries you never distinctly defined. There is no singular transgression to pinpoint, only countless small allowances you made to maintain an uneasy calm. You recall how relief felt like productivity, how relieving pressure became erroneously synonymous with progress. Each concession appeared innocent in isolation, a practical decision, a mature adaptation to the unfolding reality. Together, they paved a route that led you to a place you never intended to arrive. You learned that power seldom assaults gates anymore. It waits patiently for doors to be left ajar. Debt didn't imprison you outright. Instead, it instilled habits that rendered chains unnecessary. Dependency didn't silence you. It gently instructed you to soften your voice. Strategic autonomy became an illusion you clung to, a narrative to steady yourself as instability churned beneath your feet. The phrase promised sovereignty, yet delivered mere management, endless and exhausting, leading you into submission. You now recognize that independence without influence is merely a facade, not a reality. The influence you possessed quietly diminished, exchanged for moments of ease, familiarity, and fleeting applause. The world didn't undermine your efforts. It merely adapted to the incentives you consistently presented. Others became adept at biding their time, secure in the belief that urgency resided solely on your side of the negotiation. What you perceive as a downfall is, in truth, a revelation the instant the illusion becomes transparent enough to discern the truth. You remain upright, still articulating your thoughts, still making choices but constrained by lines drawn in invisible ink. The most profound transformation did not arise from force, but from the art of patience exercised with greater finesse than sheer power. By the moment you acknowledged the loss, it had already been assimilated, evaluated, and accepted as the new normal. Strategic independence didn't fail in a dramatic fashion. It subtly faded into a state of dependency, masquerading as collaboration. Thus, the largest shift in power over the last 2 decades occurred silently, without conflict, and without your intervention.